What is a power forward? That is a question that has become increasingly difficult to answer as the NBA has evolved. In the early 2000s, we saw the position at the peak of its dominance. Tim Duncan, Kevin Garnett, Dirk Nowitzki, all top 10 players, all MVPs, all power forwards. That's not to mention other names in that era like Amari Stoudemire, Chris Webber, Pau Gasol, Chris Bosh, and so on. But at the same time that those players became relics of the past, their position became relics along with them. Today's power forwards are fairly indistinguishable from small forwards. Power forwards are just taller small forwards now. Every power forward seems to be some version of Jeremy Grant, not some version of Horace Grant like back in the day. But why is that? How does a position in the NBA just die? And if that's something that can happen, well, I think I know who's next. Before I get into today's video, I want to talk about our sponsor, Sleeper Fantasy. Do you consider yourself a hardcore NBA fan? Do you think that you know ball? Well, there's no better way to put that to the test than with Sleeper Fantasy. Sleeper is a daily fantasy site where you can choose 2 to 8 of your favorite players from pregame, live, or even across different sports. Pick more or less than the predicted stats, and with Sleeper Fantasy, you can get up to 100 times payouts if you're right, which is pretty insane. Sleeper is also doing a massive giveaway. Starting now through December 25th, Sleeper will be giving away $1 million. All you have to do is place a $5 contest and you'll be in the running for a chance to win big cash prizes. Randomly selected winners will be announced December 26th. And for new users, they are going to be sweetening the deal by matching your first deposit up to $500 for a limited time rather than the typical $100. This is through December 10th. So get in there while you can. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for further details. They are currently operational in over 25 states, so check out Sleeper Fantasy today. Thank you to Sleeper for sponsoring this video. Real quick, just so we have some foundation to stand on, let's go ahead and define a few terms for those that don't know. What are positions? Well, they're not exactly different spots on the floor. They're more like job descriptions. There's 5 positions for the 5 players on the court in any given team. Point guard, shooting guard, small forward, power forward, and center. Also called the 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And traditionally, the bigger the number, the bigger the player. The point guard, or the 1, is typically the smallest player on the floor, and the 5 is typically the biggest. But these are not necessarily the laws of basketball, just generally the trend. A 1 can definitely be bigger than a 2, but traditionally there is a correlation between position and height. But the job of each position is not defined by their heights, but rather the specific skill sets they bring to the table. For example, the 1 is usually the first person who gets the ball on offense and is tasked with dribbling the ball up the court and passing to their teammates, while the 5 is often the player closest to the basket and is thus responsible for protecting the rim and collecting rebounds on misses as well as finishing at the rim. 2s and 3s are often both called wing players because that's where they usually spend most of their time on the court. So where does that leave the 4? Historically, they've been considered the other big man on the floor. Centers were the biggest, but power forwards were also really big players, just expected to have more versatility, generally being more capable as shooters, passers, and ball handlers, and with more versatility on the defensive end as well. That said, the traditional idea of a power forward was more big man-like than perimeter player-like. But this has obviously changed quite a bit. That's why we're here, so let's talk about it. July 10th, 2010. This is one of the most important dates in the death of the power forward position. This isn't the day it ended, but rather the day that set things in motion. What happened this day? Well, this.
Right to the chase. Dwayne and Chris. Dwayne, we'll start with you. Where are you going to be playing next season?
Well, I'm back in Miami, man. I'm back in, as for now, I'm back in Wade County.
Back in Miami with the Heat. Chris, you want to jump in and tell us where you're going to be as well?
Yeah, I'm joining Mr. Wade in Miami.
And this fall, man, it's very tough. And this fall, I'm going to take my talents to South Beach and join the Miami Heat.
Chris Bosh, signing with the Miami Heat, leaves the Toronto Raptors after being a bright spot in an otherwise dull situation. While he made 5 All-Star teams out of his 7 seasons with Toronto, the Raptors never did a great job of putting help around him. They only finished above 500 once in Bosh's tenure. Vince Carter was traded early into Chris's sophomore season, and after that, the list of his other noteworthy teammates in Toronto is extremely short. But even though he didn't find much success prior to joining the Heat, Miami was still getting a hell of a player in Chris Bosh.
Bosh jabs up, now drives, strong reverse slam! Shot clock down to 4, Chris. Oh! Williams driving, goes up strong, he throws it down in his face!
Weber tipped it away, Bosh forced to get it, 4 to shoot, Bosh for 3! I don't believe it went in.
Bosh in Toronto was not explicitly a 4. In fact, he played a lot of 5 because he primarily played alongside another 4/5 in Andrea Bargnani. But in an ideal circumstance, Chris Bosh was viewed as more of a 4, and it seemed like Miami was that ideal circumstance. Although sharing the floor with LeBron James and Dwayne Wade would mean less shots for him, this allowed Chris Bosh to be an excellent role player and a play finisher on offense, and for him to focus his energy on being a truly devastating defensive player. So, Bosh started this new chapter of his career at the power forward position. There was just one problem. Their center rotations sucked. The starting center for Miami in the 2010-11 season would regularly alternate between Zydrunas Ilgauskas, Joel Anthony, and Eric Dampier. Big Z and Damp, yes, that was his nickname, were both 35 years old. Joel Anthony was 28, so at the bare minimum he at least had his legs under him, and he would be the team's main center in the 2011 playoffs, where Joel would average a remarkable 2.8 points and 4.6 rebounds. Throughout the year, Miami attempted to make upgrades at the center position, but the other teams in the league refused to give Miami more firepower. Now, how exactly did 2011 end for the Heat? Well, ironically, they lost to a power forward on a historic playoff run. This is ironic not only because of the video topic at hand, but because a lot of Dirk's futuristic skill set exposed the weaknesses of the traditional power forward. While Dirk wasn't exactly our idea of a modern 4, he was certainly seen as an unconventional 4 for his era, and many thought his dependence on jump shots as a big man meant a championship would never come. So when he shattered those expectations by beating a team that was expected to win the championship since the preseason, it certainly foreshadowed the coming paradigm shift for the power forward position. The Miami Heat, despite being considerably more talented and heavily favored in this series, lost in the finals at the hands of a power forward that spaced the floor. So naturally, some adjustments needed to be made for the Heat. The first of those adjustments was that Chris Bosh was officially a center, at least in the moments that mattered most. From there, LeBron James would slide over to the power forward position, allowing the Heat to put another wing shooter on the floor. In this case, it was Shane Battier who they signed in free agency. Joel would start a majority of the regular season, but when the playoffs came around, the lineup was Mario Chalmers, Dwayne Wade, Shane Battier, LeBron James, and Chris Bosh. Now, instead of an offensive 0 on the floor, the Heat had a 38% three-point shooter who could catch and shoot off of passes from LeBron and Wade's drive-in kicks. This made Miami a much better offensive team in the postseason, and it bolstered their perimeter defense significantly, which was especially absolutely necessary facing OKC in the finals. The Thunder were a quick and perimeter-oriented team, and having multiple switchable wings made containing a young Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook, and James Harden significantly easier. After the Heat, and more specifically LeBron James, lost the 2011 finals in embarrassing fashion, they managed to redeem themselves by capturing this title, and moving LeBron to the 4 and Bosh to the 5 was pivotal in these two finally becoming champions. So the following season, the position change would become full-time for Miami. LeBron was the starting power forward and Chris Bosh the starting center. And with this lineup, the Heat were more dominant than ever.
Wade from behind takes it away. Chalmers, Hole, James! Post for three. Gets it in. Here's James on the drive for the win. Won't go. Rebound Bosh. Back out to Allen. His three-pointer. Bang! Tie game with 5 seconds remaining. Cross-court pass to Green. Green blocked by Bosh. Game over. It's back-to-back titles for the Heat. The 2013 NBA championship resides once again in Miami.
Let's stop and consider what this all means. Miami won back-to-back titles by opting not to go with the traditional idea of a power forward and center. Instead, their power forward migrated to the center position, and their small forward, LeBron James, who happens to be big as hell if you were not aware, shifted to power forward. The NBA had dipped its toes in the small ball pool before, with the likes of the 7 seconds or less Suns and Dwight Howard's Orlando Magic, but this was the first time any team had won a title by diving all the way in. With no traditional power forward on the floor, they had more space to operate with offensively. Rather than Joel Anthony standing in the dunker spot, leaving his defender to stand in front of the rim where Dwayne Wade and LeBron would be going downhill, instead it was Bosh as the 5, either spotting up from mid-range or 3, which meant rim protection had to become more of a team effort on the part of their opponent, or they would risk giving Chris an easy look. Help would rotate over from the wing, and LeBron and Wade would both be very capable of making the right read and hitting the open shooter. And on defense, Miami was remarkably switchable. Bosh was super quick on his feet for a 5. He could easily step up in a pick and roll while being able to recover on the roll man. He could even handle himself one-on-one against most small guards. James could defend 1 through 4 and sometimes 5s with how bulky he was in Miami. Wade could guard 1 through most 3s. Shane Battier could defend 1 through 4. They had also brought in wing shooters like Ray Allen and Mike Miller, who would go on to hit some very big shots for Miami. The team was applying very modern day basketball principles and thriving because of it. And when something like this happens in the NBA on this scale, the rest of the league notices, and they either try to copy it for their own success or just to match up well against Miami specifically. This created a trend that would only become more prevalent and expanded on with time. Let's fast forward a bit. Right after Miami's reign of terror came to an end, there was another dynasty right around the corner, one that no one really saw coming.
Curry splits the defense behind the back, fires a 3. Oh, he puts it in! What a spectacular move! The Warriors, Iguodala on the ball, got it, stop. Maybe it's Howard. Thompson. Gonna need help right away. Steph goes to double, and Draymond from the weak side. Curry analyzes, shakes the ball, just floats it into the ball.
When Steve Kerr took over for the Warriors, he was given a roster with 2 all-star caliber players, a point guard, Stephen Curry, and a power forward, David Lee. David was a very traditional 4. He was a good finisher, great post scorer, had a solid mid-range jumper, was a pretty good passer, and an excellent rebounder. He was an all-star just 1 season prior to Kerr's tenure, and because of that, Steve had every intention of starting David. However, he went into training camp rehabbing an injury, which meant that second-round pick small forward Draymond Green would be inserted into the starting 4 spot. And I guess the rest is history. The Golden State Warriors came out of nowhere and won a scorching 67 games in the 2014-15 season. They found their success through 5 major pillars. First is obviously Stephen Curry, bare minimum a top 15 player ever, and he is in my personal top 10. Then there was his splash brother, Klay Thompson, the coaching of Steve Kerr, fantastic bench depth, including one of the best 6 men in the league, and last but not least, Draymond Green. Draymond Green proved to be an incredibly dominant defensive player at the 4 spot. Despite being 6'6" and not even particularly bulky, he could hold his ground against the bigger, more traditional power forwards in the league, all while having the speed to defend 1 through 5. Draymond would make all defensive first team as he anchored Golden State's #1 defense, and on the offensive end, at least early in his Warriors career, he could shoot the ball at a pretty good percentage for his position, certainly better than David Lee could, and his biggest asset on offense for his whole career was his excellent passing. Draymond got his assist numbers up to 7 per game in just his 2nd year as a starter. So the Golden State Warriors found more success than anyone anticipated, all while replacing their traditional power forward who was a recent all-star with a late 2nd round pick small forward. And when it wasn't Draymond Green, it was another career small forward in Andre Iguodala. The message there was pretty clear. This type of player is a thing of the past. This type of player is the future. Here we are nearly a decade later, and the future is now. Traditional power forwards are essentially the middle ground between a wing and a big man. Not quite as big as a center, maybe as tall, but definitely not quite as bulky. This allows for quicker movement, a bit more versatility, and occasionally putting the ball on the floor more than your typical center. But they're still primarily doing big man things, rebounding, finishing, and rim protection. On the spectrum from small forward to center, the position was firmly closer to the 5 than the 3. But as the years have gone along, 3-point shooting and spacing have become more and more emphasized, and having what was essentially 2 centers out there really muddied that up. It was common for 4s to have more of a mid-range game than your average 5, which certainly qualified as spacing all the way through the early 2000s, but as the demand for 3-point shooters went up, the value of players who could not shoot went down, way down. Having a mid-range game wasn't enough. Teams started only being willing to concede having 1 non-shooter on the floor, and usually it was a center. Think about shooting versus, say, the ability to post up. How much can you affect the offense without the ball in your hand with either skill set? If you can really shoot the ball, you bring value to an offensive possession even when never actually touching the ball. Defenses will stick to you like glue, which means double teams and just general help defense become less prevalent. But if a defensive player can afford to sag off of you, well, that makes life harder for the other 4 offensive players on the court. Post scoring isn't going to keep a defender locked to your hip. There's inherently less room to work with on offense when you're that close to the basket, so a defender can bring help while not risking giving you an open look. And that's not to just rag on post scoring, because even if you are a post scorer, you're still better off having shooters around you rather than another big man whose defender can bring help on your post-ups. So as a post player, your value off of the ball shrinks dramatically, especially when on the floor with another post player. But if it's a shooter instead, with or without the ball, you are helping on offense by drawing defenders away from the action. Now you have to factor in defense. When other teams are running multiple shooters, you have to be able to defend the perimeter. The only position that can get away with not being great on the perimeter is center. Otherwise, you're obsolete as a defender. Traditionally, 4s, while typically faster than 5s, were still slower-footed players. They became obsolete. Now, if you're a traditional power forward and you're seeing this evolution happen, what exactly do you do? Well, you either evolve your game, migrate to another position or just fall out of relevance in the league. Those fours that were big enough just became centers. That is certainly the easiest way to do it. Think of Chris Bosh and Serge Ibaka as examples, or like LaMarcus Aldridge. He became a 5 after his first 2 years with San Antonio, or how Anthony Davis has played more and more center over the years and has always found more success at that position. But the power forwards who just weren't big enough to play the 5 either died out or evolved into modern 4s. The two examples I'll use here are David Lee and Blake Griffin. The David Lees of the NBA unfortunately just died out. To be fair to David, he was already in his 30s when this went down, so his career wasn't exactly on the upswing either way, but after returning from injury, David had lost his starting spot to Draymond and played just 18 minutes a game in the regular season as a result of that, and just 8 minutes a game in the postseason. He would leave in free agency the following year, being a 15 to 18 minute per game journeyman on the Celtics, Mavericks, and Spurs. He retired at just the age of 33 in 2017. Unfortunately, at the end of his career, David Lee found himself in a league that did not have a place for him or his play style anymore. But unlike David, Blake was at the peak of his abilities when this transition happened, and he acted accordingly. By the 2017-18 season, Blake, who had previously attempted just 268 three-pointers throughout his entire 7-year career, now took 322 in a single season. This was followed by arguably his best season, where he took 522 threes in his first full season for the Pistons. He made them at a good rate, shooting 36%, and Blake was also much more of a ball handler and passer than he ever had been before, truly becoming more small forward-like in his game. Unfortunately, injuries would prevent us from seeing a ton of this version of Blake Griffin, but it proved to be the best version, and it was clear that Blake had seen the writing on the wall for his position and adjusted accordingly. So to answer the question, what even is a power forward now, rather than the traditional concept of a more versatile big, the 4 has evolved into a 3 with size instead of a 5 with speed. Power forwards are just small forwards, but a little bit bigger. Like, yeah, that's pretty much it. All power forwards are Jeremy Grant, a big wing that can shoot threes, defend multiple positions, hopefully be a connector on offense, being able to dribble and pass at a solid rate, ideally being a better rebounder than your average 3, but ultimately your job is to do what a small forward does while just being a little bit bigger. This change resulted in a fundamentally different sport in many ways. More spacing means scoring is easier and defense is harder. Defense being harder makes defensive versatility so much more important. Being able to shoot the ball is no longer a nice perk, it is a requirement. And all of this extra space also means extra speed and therefore extra pace. Because of this, the number of 20+ point scorers in the NBA has doubled in the last 10 years, and there's been a new team setting the record for best offensive rating every single season. The removal of the power forward opened up the game, made it faster, made players more versatile, and demanded more out of each individual player. It's just a different sport now. Darwinism is the theory that species evolve based on natural selection. Natural selection is the idea that organisms better adapted to survive the environment they're in are more likely to reproduce, while those that are not well adapted will perish. Over time, through natural selection, a species will look entirely different, going from ape to man, or from short-ass neck giraffes to long-ass neck giraffes. Darwinism was developed by Charles Darwin, one of the greatest scientific minds in human history and a remarkably creative namer of things. But what does this have to do with basketball? Obviously, NBA players are not reproducing to further their species, or at least not with each other. But if we look at each individual position as though it's its own species, then through power forwards we can see the difference between adapting and perishing. Using what we know about the history of the power forward, we can spot the signs for what position is on its way out, as well as what those players can do to find their place. Traditional power forwards were those short-necked giraffes. and they're dead now. And as the game's evolution continues, there is one position that's necks are looking a little bit short to me. What position might that be? Well, let's look at the options. With the death of the traditional four, we're essentially left with four positions: point guard, shooting guard, small forward, and center. Now there are two positions that I think should be rather easy to remove, those being small forward and center. If small forward is such an effective position that it essentially swallowed and doubled its amount of players, well, it's safe to say that it's a dominant archetype, one that will not go away anytime soon or really ever. As for centers, in the past, many have speculated that the game will one day become multiple different forwards and wings out there, and centers will be left in the dust. This speculation happened towards the early to mid 2010s, and then the rise of Nikola Jokic and Joel Embiid to MVP level dominance happened, making it quite clear that the center position was not going anywhere, with fresh faces like Chet Holmgren and Victor Wembanyama on their way, and established big fours successfully translating to the five like Anthony Davis. The death of the center position really is not in the cards. The benefit of having a rim protector or someone who's just too big for anyone to stop on offense, that value will never go away. The game can become about three-point shooting and guard skills all at once, but at the end of the day, a shot at the rim is the best shot you're going to be able to get. If anything, spacing exists just to make those paint touches easier. So having someone who is great at the rim on both ends is just inherently very valuable. And frankly, the fact that the position survived a truly bleak era of centers between Dwight and Jokic shows the staying power the position will always have. Obviously, centers have evolved into having a more diverse skill set, but that's true to some degree of all positions. So that leaves us with the two guard positions, point guard and shooting guard. When we compare the recent evolution of both positions and look at which has evolved more and thus is more adapted for the modern game, it is quite obviously point guards. The original idea of a point guard was that's the player that initiates and orchestrates the offense through their passing. All the way back to the primitive era of hoops, positions were pretty strictly put into those kinds of boxes. Your point shoots the ball when he's open and a pass isn't available, otherwise scoring is fairly frowned upon for that position. This has changed throughout time as guards in the 2000s gained a lot more ability to score the ball through rule changes that benefited smaller players. Because of this, we saw players like Stephon Marbury, Gilbert Arenas, Kemba Walker, and Kyrie Irving, and it officially solidified itself with the success of Stephen Curry. Scoring point guards don't work until they do, and now it's a primary expectation of the position. In the 2023-2024 season, at the time of recording this video, there are 39 players averaging 20 plus points per game, and right now 10 of those players are listed at point guard. That leaves shooting guard as the most unchanged position in the modern NBA, and probably the most unchanged position throughout history. What are the expectations of a shooting guard exactly? I mean, it's in the name, shoot. You're supposed to shoot the ball, you're supposed to score the ball. More so than any other position in the NBA, you are doing your job if you are scoring as a shooting guard. Think of the Sixth Man of the Year award. As I've declared and complained about plenty of times over, Sixth Man of the Year isn't the who is the best bench player award, but rather the who scores the most points off of the bench award. Which position dominates that category? Shooting guard. Of the last 10 Sixth Men of the Years, 8 of them went to shooting guards. Lou Williams got 3 of them, then Jamal Crawford had 2. Eric Gordon got 1 with the Rockets, and in the last 3 seasons, Jordan Clarkson and Tyler Hero have won the award. Shooting guard is the position of pure buckets, and there's really no other position you can describe that basically. Point guards are expected to score and play make. Forwards are expected to do a little bit of everything, and centers are supposed to protect the rim and finish at the basket. This essentially makes two guards the least important position on the floor just by virtue of them having the shortest job description. While you might say that scoring the ball is the most important ability to have in the game, and that basketball is about first and foremost putting the ball in the basket, when it comes to the level of competition in the NBA, most players can score at an adept level in the correct circumstances. Scoring is one of the least scarce assets at the highest level of basketball. So if you want to be at the top of the top, you're going to need to bring more to the table than just buckets. Which is why the next position to die is shooting guard. Back when Magic Johnson was dominating college basketball, NBA teams didn't really know what to make of him. A player this tall being a point guard was pretty out there by contrast to the rigid old basketball principles that were established by the 70s. Many did not think Magic could play point guard because it was a position designated to little guys. Magic struggled to find a college that would even allow him to play his natural position because of these beliefs. Magic proved all of these doubters wrong in his own right, becoming arguably the best point guard of all time and a bona fide top 10 player of all time. But he also proved something about the point guard position. Anyone can be a point guard if they can dribble and pass. There is no height limitation on that skill set. Fast forward to the modern NBA, and we've seen the likes of Ben Simmons at point guard, and right now we have Luka Doncic at point at 6'8". LaMelo Ball is another 6'8" point. When he was healthy, his brother was a 6'6" point guard. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is a 6'6" point guard. Tyrese Halliburton is 6'5". Cade Cunningham is 6'7". The top guard prospect in the 2024 draft is a 6'5" point guard. Back in the earlier days of the NBA, big men play was so much more emphasized than guard play that the guard position was just never played by big guys because they were never encouraged to learn guard skills. That was for the little guys. But it is becoming increasingly common for taller and taller players to have that skill set. And as previously mentioned, the expectation for point guards now is for them to be more prevalent scorers than ever. Back in the day, if you had a 6'4" to 6'7" player with guard skills who was primarily a scorer, you just immediately locked that player into the shooting guard position. That's just how it was. You're a tall, score-first guard? Well, it sounds like you're playing the two. If a player like Luka Doncic were to have come up in the 80s, get drafted, and play in the early 90s, he would have been a 2 guard, maybe even a 3. But in the modern NBA, that's your leading scorer, playmaker, and ball handler, and thus, that is your point guard. And just for an example of the reverse of that, if Dwayne Wade came up today, let's say he is the top guard prospect in 2024. There is no way in hell he is playing shooting guard. Wade would be a point in the modern NBA. I think there is a strong argument to be made that Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant would have been point guards as well. I personally feel that way. But of course, to play the point, you need to have those playmaking chops. If you have the size to be the 2, the scoring to be either position, but not the playmaking to be a point, then you are a 2 guard. If you're a shooting guard that can pass and dribble, well, now you are migrating to the point guard position. If you can't pass and dribble, then you are still a shooting guard. This pretty much inherently makes the shooting guard position the weakest between the two. And that shows itself in the modern day talent pool at the 2 guard spot. Have you ever stopped to consider just how weak the shooting guard position has gotten in the last few years? Why are we constantly having Donovan Mitchell versus Devin Booker debates? Is that because it's just such a fun comparison with so much history? Or is it just that there are only 2 shooting guards in the league that you could describe as truly elite players? Ironically, even with those 2, Devin Booker has evolved into a point guard this season now that Chris Paul is gone. He is averaging around 9 assists per game right now, being the lead orchestrator of Phoenix's offense. It's similar to what happened with James Harden, who is another great example of a 2 guard being molded into a point. James was a shooting guard for many years that was an excellent passer, and then modern basketball principles apply, and now he's a point guard. Same thing happened with Jamal Murray. Drafted as a shooting guard, he displayed point guard skills and then moved positions. This trend of turning 2s into 1s has significantly weakened the talent pool of the shooting guard position. After Booker and Mitchell, who's up next? Well, there's Anthony Edwards. That's a really solid one and proof that there's not no hope for the position. But then after that, there's what? Desmond Bane, Zach LaVine, Tyler Hero, Jalen Green, Devin Vassell, Kevin Huerter, Buddy Hield. Don't get me wrong, all of those guys have talent and they are good NBA players. But there's no other position in the league where a player of Kevin Huerter's caliber is probably a top 10 player at that position. And there's one player in this group that I would like to highlight in particular. Zach LaVine. Zach is the player that actually inspired this video. Recently, a report came out that both parties, both Zach and the Chicago Bulls, would be interested in a trade. This naturally prompted what it always does, which is trade discourse. Now, there are a lot of types of discourse in the NBA world that I cannot stand. However, trade discourse might be the worst, because good God, do people just not understand how trade value works? As a result, I saw some truly preposterous trade proposals. Now, way overvaluing players isn't an uncommon thing in these circumstances. However, in this case, the sense I got from people was that they just did not understand that this particular type of player isn't a very good one. Luckily, those with a sense of reality dialed things back, and from there, I got to watch multiple fan bases debate if Zach LaVine was worth even a good player and a first-round pick. And I could almost feel in real time collectively people going, yeah, we're good on Zach LaVine. No one wants to bank their team's success on a shooting guard. A scoring guard that cannot play make just isn't that valuable. I understand why so many people look at points per game and get a tingling feeling in their pants, like, is that a banana in your pants, or do you just see a 25+ point per game score? But in reality, you're either a guard that can play make and you play point, or you're a guard that can't and you get left behind at the shooting guard position, where you hold significantly less value as a player. But this isn't really even a prediction. The rigidness of positions in previous eras of basketball defines so much of how the game was played, and we are seeing that rigidness get deconstructed in the current evolution of basketball. The wheels have been in motion for a while. The traditional shooting guard position is already dying out. Power forwards still exist, obviously. Very different from the idea of a power forward 20 years ago, absolutely, but they're still here. And the same can and will be said about the shooting guard position. They just need to evolve similar to power forwards. And just like with the death of the position, I think the evolution is already happening. That evolution is very similar to what power forwards went through. The 2 is just going to become another spot for a wing, for a forward. Rather than expecting your 2 to be a pure bucket getter, the expectation is becoming similar to the expectations of a wing. 3-point shooting, good defense, connectivity on offense, attacking closeouts, but not really getting the ball in the position to isolate too much. Isolations are left for players that can pass or are just too damn big to be stopped, or both if you're Nikola Jokic. But players like KCP, OG Anunoby, and Derek White, these players are the future of the shooting guard position. None of these guys are great passers, and they're all 6'4" to 6'7", but they can hit their threes, score off of quick moves, and exist within the flow of the offense, all while playing fantastic defense. I strongly believe that basketball will one day be distilled into 3 positions: point guard, forward, and center. Whoever your best perimeter-oriented player is, regardless of their height, is going to be playing the 1. You have your singular big man to do the whole big man thing on both ends, and then after that, you have a series of players who can defend multiple positions and fill their role on offense. That's exactly how the Denver Nuggets were so successful this previous season. Jamal Murray as your point, Jokic as your 5, and essentially 3 wings: KCP, MPJ, and Aaron Gordon. And as for players like Zach LaVine, they become relics of the past, just like the David Lees of the world did. Perhaps finding success as sixth men, but not finding themselves as pivotal parts of very good teams. Alright, well, that's the video. A lot of this stuff is pure theory, so I'm curious to see what you guys could add to the conversation, how you would challenge certain parts of what I had to say, and so on. If you enjoyed this video, well, I have good news. We're going to be dropping something just as high quality as this once a week. Subscribe to the channel if you are new, and drop a like to help the video do better in the algorithm. But that is it. Goodbye.